Welcome to the Stoic Responder Podcast. I'm your host, Christopher Healy. As a special agent who spent more than 15 years conducting large-scale fraud, money laundering, and public corruption investigations, Stoic philosophy provided a mindset edge that became the foundation of my professional success. My mission today is to share those same ancient mindset lessons with you so that you can turn obstacles into opportunities and adversity into advantage. Time to muster up. Hey everybody, welcome back to the Stoic Responder Podcast. Before we get started, I want to remind you of our favorite 501c3 that supports the law enforcement community, and that is, of course, the Overwatch Collective. The Overwatch Collective is a nonprofit and podcast funding therapy sessions and supporting mental health initiatives for our first responders, our veterans, and their families. Their motto is, one more is one less, and I take that to heart personally, because one more individual that we can provide services to is one less statistic. Please check them out at theoverwatchcollective.com. You can go there, you can make a donation, you can buy some sweet gear, the t-shirts, the hats, the sweatshirts, all quality stuff, and it all goes to support a great cause. Or you can purchase a ticket to their annual fundraiser, which is on August 24th, 2024 in San Mateo, California. Greg and his people over at the Overwatch Collective are doing great things for this community. Please support them because they are supporting us. Folks, this is episode 44. It's all perspective. Let me start you out with a quote from Marcus Aurelius, the great emperor, the great philosopher king. Everything we hear is an opinion, not a fact. Everything we see is perspective, not the truth. Boy, does this hit hard in the middle of a presidential election season. Everything we see is perspective, not the truth. Everything we hear is opinion, not a fact. Boy, isn't it ever. Any single thing that's in the news today is being taken with a grain of salt, or at least it should be. I know a lot of folks, myself included, have changed their perspective on how much they trust the media over the last 4 or 5 years. And certainly Marcus Aurelius had his thoughts on this as well, so let's dig into it. I'm going to make this personal. And for those of you who know me, you know that I spent 10 years working on the southwest border. Most of that time was in the Rio Grande Valley, although I did some work in Laredo, in El Paso, and in Eagle Pass, not El Paso, and in Del Rio as well. Some of you may remember Del Rio because in September 2021, images and videos circulated showing Border Patrol agents on horseback confronting a group of illegal immigrants from Haiti on the banks of the Rio Grande River outside of Del Rio. And as this rush of Haitians attempted to illegally enter the United States, some of these agents that were working on horseback tried to manage the crowd. That's what a lot of our mounted law enforcement does. It's crowd control, right? You see that a lot in New Orleans, for instance. During Mardi Gras, the police use horses to control the crowds, to push people back. It's an effective way to push people back. And the Border Patrol, for 100 years now, has been a mounted force in many parts of the border, many parts of the southwest border. I know many Border Patrol agents who are on the horse patrol, and I understood as I was watching this happen what was happening. There were already some 12,000 people clustered under a bridge in Del Rio, Texas. To put that in perspective, Del Rio is a town of maybe 35,000 people. So the amount of individuals who are crossing the river at that time, who are clustered under that bridge, were overwhelming not just the Border Patrol, not just Customs and Border Protection, their parent agency, not just DHS, their parent department, but it was overwhelming the resources available in the community as well. It was causing a major safety and security issue. It was causing a health crisis because these individuals they were living under a bridge. They were crossing this river and pushing themselves under the bridge. So Border Patrol, when faced with even more of them coming across, was doing everything that they could to prevent these individuals from setting foot on dry land. These folks were wading across a very shallow section of the Rio Grande River in September of 2021, and really all summer leading up to that. And so what these Border Patrol agents on horseback were doing, and as you can clearly see in the video and in the images, is they were using their horses for crowd control. They were up and down the shallow water in the river trying to move back and forth and prevent individuals from crossing into the United States, from having that dry foot, that we used to call it wet foot, dry foot, from getting that dry foot on U.S. soil and then becoming our problem. So they're trying to keep them away and trying to push them back. Unfortunately, some of these still photographs of this incident were characterized by dishonest media and by propagandists on one side of the political aisle as showing the agents, quote unquote, whipping or strapping people. Now, that's not true. These long reins that they have, these long leather reins, are used to control the horses. If you've ever ridden a horse, and I come from a family where my sister rode horses. I grew up across the street from a horse farm. I watched people riding horses. I rode horses myself. My wife's family is heavily involved in rodeo. They ride horses. This is anybody who's been around horses looks at those images, looks at those videos, and says they're using their reins to control the horses. They're not whipping anybody. That's not what those reins are. They are not whips. They are not straps. They are controlling the horses. Unfortunately, the White House, DHS management, at the time, the White House press secretary, Jen Psaki, the president himself, the vice president herself, all came out and accused these agents of whipping people based on these false characterization of the video. A narrative was established. And once established, that narrative drowned out the truth. And when the investigation into the agent's conduct eventually cleared them of any wrongdoing, like immediately, my prior agency, the Office of Inspector General, they said, no, there's no wrongdoing here. There's nothing to pursue. They kicked it down the line. It ended up all the way down to a management inquiry. And years later, when the agents were cleared of any wrongdoing, almost 2 years later, there were no apologies from the smear merchants who had long since moved on. There were no apologies from the Secretary of the Department of Homeland Security. There were no apologies from the press secretary. There were no apologies from the people in the media who claimed that this happened. There were no apologies from the president. There were no apologies from the vice president. There wasn't a single solitary ounce of accountability. And this incident is a good reminder that we in the law enforcement community work in a dynamic environment where deceptively edited images and videos can create an anti-police fervor in the blink of an eye. We've all been there. I've always assumed that every time I was running a search warrant on a house, that I just figured I was on camera the entire time and I should act accordingly. I figured that there was video footage of every moment that I was on this property and I should act accordingly. But what happens if in a 35-minute long or 3-hour-long search warrant, you have a 30-second joke or something occurs where somebody says or does something? That is the thing that is going to be chopped up, edited, and sent out to the world and put out there in the blink of an eye, creating anti-police fervor. We can think of countless times that this has happened since 2000 of a use of force incident being presented as something without full context. Most recently, I can think of the shooting in Chicago. I forget the individual's name. Police in a jump out group stopped an individual. Now this individual had warrants. He had previously had a firearm. He was a violent felon. He shot one of the police officers as they approached the vehicle, and they fired back on him. And what do you see in the headlines? Police fire 96 rounds. No indication in the headline that this individual fired first. No indication that the police officer was shot. No indication that this individual had violent felonies in his past, including for carrying a weapon. No indication that he was operating in a high crime area and that these individuals these police had a good reason to stop the vehicle. None of that is articulated in the headline. Instead, what we get is an image of him at his high school graduation 5 years earlier, looking like a good young man. And we get the screaming headline that police fire 96 rounds. And we are left to make the assumption that this individual was ambushed and murdered by bloodthirsty police. Couldn't be further from the truth. Police were defending their lives. They made a lawful and necessary traffic stop. This individual chose to shoot them, and they defended their lives. The same thing as with the Border Patrol agents, right? This is going to happen. These incidents happen all the time. They create societal outrage. They spin things up. These dishonest brokers of a narrative create these sort of outrages all the time. And it forces me to ask, and maybe many of you are asking the same question, if they frame police conduct this way, if the news media takes dishonest narratives and spins them up as a way to create societal outrage, what else are they manipulating? What other news items are being similarly manipulated? What economic news? What national security news? What foreign policy news? What are they doing this with outside of the police environment that we're familiar with? Again, going back to the quote from Marcus Aurelius that started us off, everything we hear is an opinion, not a fact. Everything we see is a perspective, not the truth. You see, what we perceive as truth may be colored by lies, may be colored by our own beliefs, may be colored by our own assumptions, may be colored by our own cultural conditioning. And this can lead to a multiplicity of interpretations and viewpoints of any single incident, right? Taken out of context. So rather than accepting everything at face value, everything that's presented to us, we must keep it all in perspective. If we are in law enforcement, as I was a special agent, that means that we are fact finders first and foremost. And that is what we are, after all. You can boil down all of the titles, all the sheepdog this, all of the tactical that, and at its very core, our job is to be fact finders. Our job is to engage in critical thinking. Our job is to be skeptical and curious. Because the truth, as these incidents prove again and again, and as Marcus Aurelius reminds us, is often elusive. Here's what I got for you today for a journal prompt. I want you to ask yourself, I want you to challenge yourself. What do I believe? What have I digested and seen? What do I believe to be true that I have never challenged? And then I want you to challenge it. I want you to engage in some critical thinking. I want you to ask yourself some questions. Is this thing that I believe, is this narrative that I've been presented with true? There are no sacred cows here. Challenge your beliefs. Because as Marcus Aurelius says, everything we hear is an opinion, not a fact. Everything we see is perspective, not the truth. Dig deeper. Be the fact finder that you are. Engage in critical thinking. Be skeptical. Be curious, because the truth is often elusive. And if you don't ever challenge your beliefs, how do you know them to be true? That's what I got for you today, folks. A couple ways that you can support this podcast if you're enjoying the lessons and getting something from it. Number one, pick up a copy of my book if you haven't done so already. It's called In Valor, 365 Stoic Meditations for First Responders. It's available on Amazon, Barnes & Noble, Walmart, or anywhere you get your books. If you want a signed copy, I do have some copies available. You can reach out to me, DM me, shoot me a DM. We can make that happen. I can get you a signed copy directly from the author to you. But otherwise, you can pick it up on Kindle or Nook for instant download if you'd like to read that way. If you prefer the paperback edition, as I do, it's a sweet-looking book. If you're watching on YouTube, I'm holding up a copy right now. It's a sweet-looking book. It is about 400 pages long, and it's going to provide you quotes, contextualization that is directly relatable to your job, and daily journal prompts and action items to help you practice and integrate these lessons. Number two, you can subscribe for free to the Stoic Responder on Substack. On that page, you can get the podcast delivered to your email. You're going to get my weekly newsletters as well. And that is the only place you're going to get my weekly newsletters. And that's going to come with Stoic leadership and personal development tips to help you gain greater resilience and live a life of valor. I hope you will check it out. It is free. The only thing it costs you is your email address. Number three, and finally, the easiest thing that you can do is like, share, and subscribe to this podcast so that others can learn about what we are doing here and benefit from these valuable and timeless lessons. I got one more for you this week, folks. Thanks so much for tuning in. Until next time, you are out of roll. Thank you for listening. If you enjoyed this episode, please take a moment to subscribe, like, rate, and share this podcast so that we can spread the benefits of Stoicism to other first responders. It will only take you a few moments, but it can help us tremendously. Until next time, out of roll.